While we waited, Esther got on the phone and called Tel Aviv. Most of her conversation was in Hebrew, so I didn't understand what she was saying, but the conversation got pretty heated at times. Afterwards, I asked her what was going on. The damned Israeli Defense Force is convinced that their system hasn't been breached, and there's nothing wrong with Yahalom. What's Yahalom? I asked. That's our name for the Patriot system, she said. They think we're chasing phantoms. I went online and tried to find information about the Patriot system. As I was scanning various links, the door opened and a young man wearing a jacket with a Raytheon logo came into the room. We make the Patriot system, he said breezily. What ya got? I quickly explained our hypothesis and showed him to the computer terminal and the virus we had found. He looked at it for a few minutes and the bored expression on his face disappeared. Quickly, he pulled a laptop out of his carryall and began checking lines of code. After a few minutes, he looked up at us and said, "Oh, shit. What is it?" Esther demanded. "This is bad, real bad," he said. He pointed at his laptop. "This is the operating system for the Patriots and /MPQ 65 radar tracking system." He pointed at the computer terminal I'd been using. "That virus you have has been written to alter the intercept data the radar uploads to the missile. It's not a big change, but at the speed and distance needed for an intercept, it will cause the Patriot to completely miss its intended target." I turned to Esther. "Get back to the IDF and tell them we have confirmation that the virus targets the Patriots. Then get them to check the operating systems again to see if they've been infected." I turned back to the Raytheon tech. "Don't go anywhere. We're going to need you." Then I got on the phone and called the director's office. They put me straight through. "Sir, we now have confirmation that the virus attacks the Patriot missile system. We don't know for sure, but we think the target is Israel, possibly the Dimona nuclear site." "Yes, sir. Our next priority is to try to figure out how to stop it." Esther had also been on the phone, and when I hung up, she was looking at me with an angry expression. "That'll teach those idiots to pay attention," she said. "They've already found signs of the Al-Andalus virus in one of the Patriot installations, and they're checking the others now." The Raytheon tech piped up, "Oh, they'll find it for sure. All the systems are designed to talk to one another. That way they create an umbrella of defense. If one of them is infected, you can bet they all are." Esther and I stared at each other. "So how do we fix it?" I asked him. "Well, I've never heard of one of our systems having a virus, but theoretically it ought to be pretty simple to fix. All you'd have to do is swap out the /MPQ on each of the missile batteries with a new one. Can't you just install a new operating system?" I asked. "These systems aren't like a Mac or a PC," he said. "The hardware and software are integrated. You've got subsystems running all through the unit, and they all work together. The only way to be sure you've got a clean system is a swap out." "Okay, how long does that take?" I asked. "Oh, anywhere from 8 to 12 hours. That's going to cut it very close," Esther said. "Of course, that doesn't count delivery time," the tech went on. "Delivery from where?" I asked uneasily. "From our plant in Andover, Massachusetts," he said. I slumped back into my chair and looked despairingly at Esther. "That isn't going to work," I said. I turned back to the guy from Raytheon. "You and I are going to have to try to figure out something else," I said. "We worked on the problem for hours. I tried to educate him on how viruses worked, and he tried to teach me about the Patriot system. Nothing came of it. More software engineers from Raytheon showed up, and I began shuttling among them, trying to come up with a way to extract or nullify the virus. The problem was that their system was proprietary, specific to Patriot unit. None of their programmers had ever encountered a virus aimed at their system, and they had no way to attack the problem. The easy, obvious answer for them was to swap out the units. Not only would that take way too long, but the whole system would have to be shut down during the transfer, leaving what they were protecting undefended. In effect, we'd be doing the work of the virus for IS. The first engineer began to get frustrated. "Look," he said, "if you're worried about a missile attack, your best bet is to destroy the missiles on the ground before they ever get launched. Wipe out the immediate threat, and you can swap out the Patriot tracking system at your leisure." Esther stood up and got in his face. In Gulf War I back in 1991, the Iraqis fired Scud missiles at Israel to try to draw us into the war and split up the coalition. The coalition Air Force diverted dozens of planes to Scud hunting duty, trying to find and destroy the missiles before they could be fired. For the most part, they failed because the missiles were on camouflage trucks well hidden in the desert. That was over 20 years ago, when the missiles were big and bulky. The latest missiles are smaller, harder to find, and easier to fire. So quit stalling and get back to work. Yes, ma'am. He gulped and turned back to his monitor while I tried to hide my smile. The situation was tense, but I couldn't help but be impressed at what a force of nature Esther could be. Just then she grabbed my arm and pointed at the screen with the live feed from Tel Aviv. "It's midnight," she gasped. Everyone in the room stopped and watched nervously to see what might happen. Esther leaned over and whispered, "The IDF is on full alert, and I've been told that your military is also in a high state of readiness." But the scenes from Tel Aviv revealed nothing more than the normal New Year's Eve celebrations. Esther told me with relief that Damona reported no activity at all. After that, the Raytheon guys wanted to go home, but we wouldn't let them leave. "There's too much at stake," Esther said, and the little group reluctantly went back to their work. After a while, one of them raised his head and asked, "Does anybody know what's so special about 1.492? I looked at him with a puzzled expression. "Nothing that I can think of. Why do you ask?" "Because that's the deviation the virus adds into the targeting data to divert the missiles," he said. "It just seems like such a precise number. I wondered if it had any significance." One of the other techs jumped in. 1-4-9-2? I know that stands for. Then to our surprise, he began to sing-song the childhood rhyme. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Everybody in the room laughed except for Esther, who got a strange look on her face. Quickly, she went to one of the computers and did some quick checking. "That's it," she yelled. We all looked at her in confusion, so she quickly explained. Everybody knows that King Ferdinand of Spain and Queen Isabella commissioned Christopher Columbus's expedition in 1492. But most of us in the West have forgotten the other major event in 1492. That was also the year that the last emir surrendered Granada to Queen Isabella, bringing an end to Al-Andalus. Then her face paled, and she went back to the computer. "Oh my God, look at this," she gasped. The date the emir surrendered was January 2nd. "Thomas, the attack was never planned for New Year's Eve. It's coming the day after. IS wants revenge for that disgrace. I'll bet they're planning to launch their campaign to retake Al-Andalus on the same date." The Raytheon guys were looking at her as though she was speaking Hebrew, but it sounded entirely plausible to me. Esther immediately got on the phone to call Tel Aviv, and I got our liaison to take me back up to the director's office. After I had explained what we discovered, he nodded his head thoughtfully. "From what I know of these people, I think you're right. They never forget old grudges, and they would love nothing better than to pull off a coup on the anniversary of that defeat." He started to pick up his phone but stopped to look at me. "Now you and your team have to figure out a way to stop them." When I got back to our war room, the Raytheon engineers were huddled around one of the terminals. They had managed to establish a secure link between Fort Meade and Andover, and they were now online with a test version of the Patriot Fire Control Guidance System. The next few hours were spent trying to find a way to root out the virus. But the system designers had never contemplated having to do surgery on the Patriot's operating system, and they had no way to isolate the affected areas. "It's like an epidemic," one of the techs moaned. "It's spread throughout the system and it's out of control." January 1st. While we worked feverishly, New Year's Day in Israel proceeded without incident. Although Esther and I were gratified that her prediction had been right, it just meant we were that much closer to the time we thought the real attack would begin. Finally, the head of Raytheon's technical team came to me. "We've been over and over this thing. There are only two things we can do. The first is to shut down all the units that have been infected and wipe their entire software systems completely, including all peripherals. Then we'll load software we know is clean, boot them up, and test them. But that's a time-consuming process, and even then we can't be sure that the new load won't get contaminated somewhere along the line." I shook my head and turned to Esther in frustration. "We can try that, but I don't think we can get the job finished in time before midnight rolls around again in Israel. Besides, we don't want to take the entire Damona defense system offline that long. What if the attack comes early?" She looked defeated, and I felt like I had failed. I turned back to the Raytheon people. "Isn't there anything else we can try? Some sort of error-checking routine that would recognize the problem and stop the virus? The poor guy shook his head apologetically. When the system was developed, the possibility of a virus was never considered. Now this damn disease has infected the entire system, and we just don't have any antibiotic to kill it or vaccine to block it. I started to speak, but the words stuck in my throat as an idea from the past came to mind. Smallpox. I cried. When he looked at me in confusion, I went on. The way you fight smallpox is with cowpox, a weaker form of the same disease. We may not be able to kill the virus, I said with growing excitement, but what if we inoculate the system with another virus? The group looked at me skeptically. Listen, I said, we have a virus that has infected the Patriot system and causes it to produce faulty target data that's off by exactly plus 1.492 degrees. What if we write a second virus exactly like Alan Dulles, except that our version would direct the Patriot to adjust its targeting by minus 1.492 degrees? Wouldn't the two of them cancel each other out? The software engineers began to argue among themselves, heatedly debating the idea. After 20 minutes, the head of the team turned back to me. Some of our guys think it might work, but the rest of us are doubtful. How do we know the two viruses won't cause a bigger problem? How do we know they can coexist at the same time? We don't even know that we can successfully infect the Patriot system a second time. We won't have time to test it properly. Listen, guys, I said. We already know the original virus is both highly contagious and likely to be very effective. If we create a virus that's identical to the first one except with reciprocal values inserted, it's got to work. Besides, what other option do we have? There was a lot more discussion, but finally the group grudgingly conceded that creating an Alan Dulles antivirus was the best chance we had. They set about creating the antivirus, carefully checking and rechecking to make sure that everything except the target values was absolutely identical.